At first glance, 30 East Drive in Pontefract looks like any ordinary British council house, neat, quiet, and unassuming. But behind its brick walls lies one of the darkest and most violent hauntings ever recorded in the United Kingdom. In the late 1960s, the Pritchard family moved into the home expecting a peaceful life. What they found instead was a nightmare that would make even seasoned investigators tremble. It started small, cold gusts of air, lights flickering without reason, and pools of water forming from nowhere. Then came the invisible hands that pulled bed covers off in the night, objects flying across rooms, and a violent force that seemed to despise the living. The locals began to whisper about the Black Monk, a vengeful spirit from centuries past, said to haunt the very ground the house stood on, the site of an ancient gallows. Over the months, the Pritchards endured scratches, screams, and shadows moving along the walls. Doors slammed without wind, crucifixes were torn from nails, and then the monk appeared, a dark-robed figure, his face hidden beneath a hood, only his cold eyes visible in the gloom. He wanted something, or someone, and he would not rest until the house was his again. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a case that left priests fleeing, investigators shaken, and a family forever scarred. Welcome to the Black Monk of Pontefract, Britain's most violent haunting. In August 1966, Jean and Joe Pritchard moved into their new home at 30 East Drive, Pontefract, with their children, Philip and Diane. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a quiet life in a close-knit Yorkshire neighborhood. The house was modest, with cream-colored walls and a view of the rolling fields behind it. But from the moment they turned the key in the front door, something felt wrong. The first sign came only hours after moving in. While unpacking boxes, Jean noticed a strange white powder falling from the ceiling, though there was no sign of damage or leaks. Then pools of water began forming on the kitchen floor, spreading slowly across the linoleum. Joe checked the pipes, the roof, even the drains, and all dry. The family mopped it up, thinking little of it. That night, the temperature inside the house plummeted. The air grew heavy, dense, as if the walls themselves were exhaling cold. Philip, the eldest child, felt something tug at his blanket, a gentle pull that grew more violent each time he resisted. When he finally screamed, his parents rushed in, only to find the room still, the air motionless. Over the next few days, cupboard doors slammed open, objects vanished, and shadows flickered just beyond sight. June began hearing faint footsteps upstairs while everyone was downstairs. One afternoon, as Diane played alone, she heard whispering, low guttural murmurs calling her name. The family told themselves it was nerves, imagination, or settling pipes. But late one night, as Joe passed the staircase, he saw something he could never unsee. A black-robed figure standing at the top of the stairs, still as death, watching him. The haunting of 30 East Drive had begun. The days that followed were filled with unease. The Pritchards tried to ignore what they couldn't explain, convincing themselves it was all just coincidence. But the house had other plans. It began to breathe at night, groaning timbers, creaking floors, and whispers that traveled through the walls like a chill wind. Philip was the first to notice that the temperature dropped drastically in one particular room, the spare bedroom. No matter the weather outside, that room stayed icy. When Jean tried to light a fire in the hearth, the flames extinguished instantly, as if snuffed out by invisible hands. Then came the knocking, soft at first. 3 deliberate raps on the walls, rhythmic and patient. They came from different corners of the house, always at night, always when the family was together. Joe checked every inch of the home, but the noise followed him, moving with an eerie intelligence. One evening, as Diane was setting the dinner table, the entire drawer of cutlery shot open, knives and forks scattering across the floor. The sound was deafening. Everyone froze. In the middle of the mess, a spoon slowly rotated on its own, before stopping dead. That night, Jean woke to the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, too slow to be human. When she peeked through the cracked bedroom door, she saw nothing but the dark hallway. Then the cold hit her, a freezing wave that made her breath visible. A faint whisper followed right beside her ear. Leave. This place. Her heart pounded and she slammed the door shut. But deep down she knew, whatever was haunting 30 East Drive didn't want them gone. It wanted them terrified. The haunting grew bolder as days turned into weeks. The family no longer felt alone. It was as if something watched them constantly, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. Every mirror seemed to ripple slightly when they passed by, every reflection carrying a hint of movement that wasn't theirs. One cold evening, Diane, the teenage daughter, was doing her homework in the living room when she heard a soft humming. It was a tune she didn't recognize, a slow, childlike melody. Thinking her mother was nearby, she called out, but no one answered. The humming grew louder, coming from the corner of the room where the shadows pooled thickest. Then she saw her. A girl, pale, drenched in what looked like dirty water, standing silently in the corner. Her hair hung over her face, her white dress torn and stained. She didn't move, didn't blink. Diane froze, unable to scream. The only thing that broke the silence was the sound of dripping water hitting the wooden floor. When Diane finally found the courage to blink, the figure was gone. But in her place, a puddle remained, slowly seeping into the cracks of the floorboards. Moments later, Jean rushed in after hearing her daughter's terrified cry. As Diane pointed at the corner, the light bulb above them burst, glass raining down like frozen sparks. In the brief flash before darkness consumed the room, John swore she saw a small, pale hand retreat into the shadows. That night, Diane refused to sleep in her room. She kept whispering the same phrase over and over. She was smiling at me, but her mouth wasn't moving. By now, the Pritchard family was exhausted, sleepless, frightened, and desperate for peace. The small disturbances had grown into violent outbursts. Furniture moved on its own, crucifixes flipped upside down, and the house seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. But nothing prepared them for what came next. The first appearance of the Black Monk. It was late one stormy night when Philip was jolted awake by a loud crash from downstairs. Thinking a burglar had broken in, he grabbed a flashlight and crept down the narrow staircase. The air was ice cold, his breath visible in the beam of light. As he turned the corner into the living room, the flashlight flickered, then died. From the darkness came the sound of heavy, dragging footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then a figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in black, a hood obscuring its face. Only the faint glint of two eyes could be seen, reflecting the dim light of a street lamp through the window. Philip froze, his heart thundering. The monk raised one hand, gloved and dark, and pointed straight at him. The air filled with a deep rumbling growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Philip screamed. The family rushed downstairs, flipping the lights on, but the room was empty. The only trace left behind was a strong, foul smell, like decay and damp stone. Jean found muddy footprints on the carpet, leading from the living room to the staircase. They ended halfway up the steps, and then vanished. That night, none of them slept. They now knew what haunted them had a face, and that face was hidden beneath the hood of the Black Monk of Pontefract. The sighting of the monk was only the beginning. What followed turned the haunting from frightening to violent. The entity no longer seemed satisfied with merely showing itself. It wanted to hurt. One afternoon, while Jean was doing laundry, she felt a sudden sharp pain across her back. When she looked in the mirror, 3 deep scratches had appeared, red, raw, and bleeding slightly. She screamed and Joe rushed in, but there was no one else in the room. The air was frigid, her breath visible. And from somewhere above, a low, mocking laugh echoed down the hallway. Objects began to fly across rooms. Cupboards slammed open and shut. The heavy oak table flipped over as if lifted by invisible hands. When Philip tried to help his mother, a framed photograph flew from the wall, striking him across the face and shattering on the floor. The glass left a deep cut across his cheek. Diane's experiences were the worst. While lying in bed one night, she felt the mattress sink beside her, as if someone had sat down. Then a cold hand gripped her wrist and yanked her violently toward the edge. She screamed, thrashing, until Joe burst into the room, only to find her suspended in midair for a brief second before being thrown onto the floor. The priest who came to bless the house refused to return after his first visit. His crucifix bent in his hand during prayer, and a deep growl filled the living room. The haunting was no longer subtle. The Black Monk was making his power known, and the Pritchards were trapped inside his domain. After weeks of torment, 30 East Drive no longer felt like a home. It was a living entity, twisting reality around the Pritchards. Doors would breathe open and closed like lungs. The floors creaked with phantom footsteps even when everyone was still. The house seemed alive, and worse, it seemed angry. Jean tried to keep the family together, insisting they pray before every meal. But prayer only seemed to provoke the thing. Every time they recited the Lord's Prayer, the lights flickered violently. One night, the rosary beads Diane clutched snapped apart, scattering across the floor as an unseen wind howled through the hallway. The family started noticing objects rearranged in impossible ways. Chairs stacked on tables, clocks turned backward, and mirrors fogged with words written in dripping condensation. Most of the time, the words were single phrases. Mine, get out, die. One particularly chilling evening, Joe sat in the living room alone, determined to face whatever haunted them. The silence was suffocating, the air still. Suddenly, the television turned on by itself. Only static. Through the hiss, a deep male voice whispered, "Do you believe me now?" The lights exploded. Joe fell backward, blinded by the flash. When his vision cleared, he saw it. The monk standing inches away, his face finally visible beneath the hood. A hollow void, with nothing but blackness where his features should have been. Joe screamed for his family, but when they rushed in, the figure vanished again, leaving only the smell of burning and the faint outline of a handprint seared into the wooden wall beside him. The house was no longer haunted, was possessed. After Joe's encounter with the faceless monk, the house grew unbearably oppressive. The temperature inside never rose above freezing, even in the height of summer. The family stopped sleeping upstairs. Every night they heard footsteps pacing in the hallway, dragging chains or heavy robes across the wooden floor. Diane, the youngest, suffered the worst. She would wake up screaming, clawing at her bedsheets, shouting that, "He's standing over me." Her skin bore long red scratches, as if she'd been dragged across coarse stone. Once her mother found her levitating off the bed, her hair floating upward as if underwater. Desperate, the family brought in a priest again. He entered with holy water and a crucifix, his voice trembling as he began the blessing. The walls groaned. The air turned foul. Suddenly, a violent crash echoed through the room. A table lifted and hurled across the hall, narrowly missing the priest. The crucifix bent in his hands like soft metal. "Whatever's here," he gasped. "It's no restless spirit. It's something ancient, and it's feeding off your fear." As he fled the house, the front door slammed shut behind him, trapping the family inside. For nearly an hour, every door and window refused to open. The house pulsed with a low, rhythmic sound, like a heart beating from deep within the walls. When they finally escaped, Diane looked back one last time. At the top of the stairs stood the monk, his head slowly turning toward her. This time, he wasn't alone. Dark silhouettes lined the hallway behind him, dozens of them watching in silence. The haunting was no longer a single entity. The house had become a gateway. After the priest's failed attempt, the family tried to leave the house for good. Boxes were packed in silence, their eyes darting toward every creak and shadow. But the house wasn't done with them. As Joe loaded the last box into the car, a cold wind howled from the open front door, even though it was a windless evening. Every light flickered, then died. Inside, Diane began to scream. Her mother rushed upstairs to find her pinned to the wall, invisible hands pressing against her shoulders. Her eyes rolled back white, her voice echoing with something inhuman. "You can't leave. It's already chosen." The family fled into the yard, but the house seemed alive. Windows slammed shut one by one, the sound like gunshots. Curtains moved even with no breeze. In the upstairs window, the silhouette of the monk appeared again, arms raised, robes shifting unnaturally, as if something inside them crawled beneath the fabric. That night, they stayed at a friend's house across town, but even there the haunting followed. At 3:07 a.m., every phone in the house rang at once. When Joe answered, all he heard was the faint toll of church bells and a whisper, "Go back home." The next morning, they drove past the old house. The front door was wide open. Every curtain was drawn aside, revealing nothing but darkness inside. Yet Diane swore she saw figures moving, faint, transparent shapes staring out from the windows. Joe muttered, That house doesn't want us gone. It wants us back. The haunting had moved beyond the walls. It had found them. And now, no matter where they went, the shadow of that cursed place followed. Weeks passed, but peace never came. Wherever the family went, strange things followed. Lights flickered in every new home. Footsteps echoed down empty hallways. Diane began waking up with bruises on her wrists, the same shape as the invisible hands that had held her against the wall. One night, unable to sleep, Joe sat in the living room scrolling through photos of the old house. But when he zoomed in on one picture, a shot of the staircase, his heart nearly stopped. There, standing behind his wife in the background, was the monk. The same black robes, the same hollow face, only now his head was turned directly toward the camera. The next morning, they found muddy footprints leading from their front door to Diane's bedroom. No one had entered or left the house. When Joe tried to wash them away, they reappeared within minutes, darker than before. Desperate, the family called in a team of paranormal investigators. The lead investigator, a calm woman named Evelyn, entered with high-tech equipment and a sense of purpose. But within hours, even she looked pale. The meters spiked violently near Diane's room, and the temperature dropped below freezing. Evelyn whispered, "Whatever was bound to that house has attached itself to her." Suddenly, every light went out. A low chant began to echo through the house, male voices speaking in Latin. In the beam of Evelyn's flashlight, words appeared scrawled across the wall in blood-red letters. "She belongs to us," Evelyn screamed, dragging Diane out as furniture crashed around them. The family escaped into the street, trembling, realizing a horrifying truth. The haunting was no longer about a place. It was about possession. The family had fled to a small cabin on the edge of a forest, far from the old house, far from everything familiar. But on their first night there, Diane woke to the sound of whispering. It wasn't outside. It was inside the room. She sat, slowly, her breath trembling, and saw her reflection in the mirror, smiling back at her when she wasn't. Joe rushed in, hearing her scream, only to find the mirror shattered across the floor. In the shards, faint faces stared back, dozens of them, twisted and screaming. Diane's voice turned hollow as she whispered, "He's here." Evelyn. The paranormal investigator had warned them the spirit wasn't just haunting them, it was feeding on their fear. She arrived that same night, carrying ancient relics and a book of exorcisms. Together, they prepared to confront whatever had attached itself to Diane. Midnight struck. The wind howled through the cabin, shaking the windows. The lights burst, plunging the room into darkness. A deep guttural voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. "She is mine." The floorboards cracked open, black smoke pouring out like liquid shadows. The monk's figure materialized from the darkness, taller, clearer, his face, fully visible now. Sunken eyes, blood-streaked mouth, skin like decayed wax. Evelyn shouted prayers over the roar of the storm, her cross glowing faintly as the entity screamed, the walls bending inward. Joe held Diane as the air turned ice cold. Her eyes rolled back, her body convulsing violently. The monk lunged forward. Then, suddenly, silence. Everything stopped. When the first light of dawn crept through the forest, Evelyn stood trembling. Diane was breathing again. The shadow was gone. Or so they thought. On the cabin's wall, faintly scratched into the wood, were 4 chilling words. "See you at home."